everyone, and welcome to this episode of Writers Infusion. I'm your host, Susan. You can see we're here with a large group, so I'll start the intros with the main team. There's Ed, Julie, Jen, and Dave. We have Connie Mayo, our guest critiquer author, with us today. Connie wrote The Island of Worthy Boys. This is a historical novel that takes place in Boston in the late 1800s. It's an awesome book. I loved it, and I highly recommend it. You can, if you forget the name, or you can see it on our website. So we have the link there for you. So we're really glad that she's with us today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and now our guest author today is Sush Jangi. He has written a literary novel. We're reading the excerpt. Maybe it's not all done, and maybe not literary. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do is have Sush read the summary and the excerpt, and then we'll go to the critique. Okay. Sounds good?
Can I have the summary? Okay, so basically this is a subsection of a novel I'm trying to write. It's definitely not complete.
The middle of the story.
It's somewhere in the middle, and it's a story about the larger work is about a doctor that works at night, and during the day he tries to sleep and also kind of walks around the city, and has encounters with different people.
Okay, great.
Okay, so this is a subsection from a short chapter. Rarely did I go to book clubs, but Mar dragged me to one, assuring me that I would remain under her protection from the evil eyes of the female literati. I had only read 3/4 of the novel, enough for me to make comment on its narrative structure and the motives of the protagonist if I needed to, but I never believed endings held much value, although Mar, while we walked along Brattle Street, thought endings were the very moment the novel finally flowered into its ultimate aesthetic. The house was old, but obviously premier property on a quiet, leafy outlet, far enough from the dormitories that there was no risk of drunken students stealing through its gardens at late hours and throwing bottles at the windows. Its owner was a emeritus professor who taught English at Harvard. We soon learned, however, that she was away on sabbatical, and she had subletted it to Anne, who was barely out of college, with a journalism degree that brought her little in the way of vocation. Still, the professor had graciously offered the sublet on discount to any student in the same journalism program that had kicked off her meaningful career years ago. On the kitchen counter, Anne had set out plates of brie, slices of baguette, Concord grapes, and a bottle of warm Shiraz she had already uncorked, offering a glass to Mar and I. One of my well-read friends, Mar said, introducing me to Anne, who smiled wanly from beneath a pair of thick Warby Parkers too heavy for her fragile nose and artful eyebrows. That's high praise coming from Mar. She usually leads our talking points. Anne brought the wine glass to her rosebud lips. I tell everyone that I'm enamored of any kind of reader these days, she said sadly. Others had begun to settle around the living room, a duet of old ladies on the sofa, a few younger women scattered around the table, cross-legged on the floor, another on a beanie, and the only other man in the room, Ulf, a stocky German, who sat in a chair, appearing perplexed as to what he was doing there. Lightly, a rain began tapping against the windows and kept open to let the staid July heat flow through the room, propelled by old ceiling fans that trembled unevenly as they turned. I'll start then, Anne went on after a stony silence. I've read a good many books in my life, and the more I've gone on reading, the less I've begun caring about the characters. Nowadays, what I want from a story is to get lost in its mood, and although all the critics said this book was brilliantly plotted, I never gave myself over to it, not fully or not wholly anyhow. But that's just one element, isn't it? Mar said, piping up earlier than I had expected. I do want something happening to the people in the novel that pushes them up against the wall to see how they react. We were talking earlier on the way here, she said, nudging her head towards me, and we were having an argument about whether endings were important. And I think an ending is a necessary provocation to keep the story off balance. We have a novel in Germany called Die Wand, Ulf said, in which the reader never learns the fate of the woman at the center of the novel. The story itself is an account of her loneliness and isolation, and she does not even know if anyone will ever read her story. For me, it was the absence of the ending that gave the book its power. An ending gives the people in the story over to a set and sealed fate, but without a clear ending, they are allowed to live on in my mind. That's an author's weakness if he fails at last to deliver a sentence on the characters he has imagined, Mar said. The author brings them pointedly into being, and it's his responsibility to the reader to craft as deliberate an ending. The Shiraz had gone a bit to my head. Nevertheless, I wandered into the kitchen for another glass. In the window above the sink, I saw the spires of the old church in Harvard Yard from where I'd recently heard the songs of a choir in evening practice, the melody so divine and foreboding that I had stood in the shadows of the empty campus, entranced, as I had been at the end of my college days when the whole world seemed as though it had opened itself to me. Only fleetingly did that sense of liberation still come over me, and when it did, I swore never to forget it, until soon after, I lost my grasp on it, unable to recall the depth of that intensity. I knew that the pursuit of that feeling was what drove many people, like the professor who owned this house, to stay forever within the walls of a campus, where they were protected from the graying out that happened if you wandered too far into the real world. "You're being objective," Anne was saying now to Mar. "What I want to hear from you is how you felt long after the book was over. What would that feeling be?" Mar shrugged, glancing at the two old women, who had, until now, hardly said a word, although both looked attentively on the rest of us, as though amused by our arguments. If I ever became an old man, I might do the same, listen to the annoyances and exasperations of the young to pass the time. "It's not at all how I read," Mar said. "We've talked about this before. I don't consider any kind of art to be greatly emotional for it to be useful to me." "But then I think you're missing the point," Anne laughed. "Or at least you're missing a lot of the joy that art brings me. I would have considered that a male perspective, but Ulf actually feels otherwise." Again, Ulf seemed only rattled, looking at me to throw him a line. "Mar's not being entirely truthful," I said. "I don't see her cry often, but certainly during films, or after reading certain books, or in a concert, I've seen her look overtaken by the art." Mar glared at me, although I had only meant this playfully, without any kind of criticism of who Mar was. In fact, the book club and the arguments that I was hearing and making in my mind, even reading, was a play in itself. The words within a novel arranged beside each other to create an enchantment that was often lost from the work I did every day. Never did a novel reproduce wholly for me the happiness or tragedy or dullness of ordinary life, but called out to me as though from behind a wall, and the joy I had was trying to hear, however distantly and imperfectly, what the novel was trying to say to me. But I never said this to the club because I didn't want anyone to talk me out of my opinion. Mar and Ulf and the others, after all, were clever and thoughtful enough that had I listened to what they were saying, I might have changed my mind.
I just want to say, I love the name Ulf.
Keep that.
That's a good one. You did a good job reading.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
it was really
excellent.
nice to hear you read it.
Thanks.
It's a kind of poetic in a way. Your writing is pretty. I like it. Yeah. We're going in from the middle of the story, so sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to do that. So I guess the first question I had is I get the whole scene and they're having a book club. What's the main character's name besides the doctor?
I don't know.
We don't
Oh, you don't know yet?
Oh, excellent.
Okay. And what kind of doctor is he, by the way?
He's like a
The
general.
whole novel
General,
without
okay.
yeah.
So if this whole novel is from he's walking around, he's in different scenarios, what I'd like to see even in this scene is more about what he's thinking at various places. It might only be me who thinks that, but you have the whole intro. The first part it really occurred to me was when they started talking and when Mar mentions him almost right away, even though he doesn't know anyone. Is he thinking, oh shoot, I'll keep it clean. Oh shoot, what? Now I have to talk. Or what's he thinking when that's said? And when someone else is saying something, is he thinking something about what they said or how they're saying it? Does he like what he said? Does he think that they're pretentious? Does he think that they're spot on? And I know that you do that a bit at the end. And the last two sentences, it definitely helped to hear you read them And even though I can tell there's a lot behind them, I had a hard time understanding them, and I read them 7 or 8 times. I mean, I really tried. So I got part of it, but then I just couldn't follow it, and that might just be me. But I would like to know throughout, what is he thinking, and how is he reacting to everything that's going on? Because this is new to him, and he doesn't really know anyone except his friend. And that can be an uncomfortable position to be in for a lot of people.
Yeah, I had a similar kind of reaction. I thought you did a terrific job of bringing out the different characters just through dialogue. I mean, you get a real sense of who Anne is, who Ulf is, who Mar is, and things like that. I thought that was wonderful, especially revealing it through dialogue. That's a tricky thing to do. But I didn't get much of a sense about the main character. Although I also think that, this being the middle of the book,
Right.
we might know a lot about the main character before we get to this point. But even given that, I'm not sure what this scene does as far as advancing either the action or the main character. To me, the only thing I can see that happens is that there's a little bit of friction between the main character and Mar, and maybe that's the point. But that was about it as far as what I saw.
That was my first note was, what is the purpose of the scene in the larger book? Because they tell you when you are editing, say you have you said it's 70,000 words. Let's say it's really huge at the end when you finish and it's 150,000 words. When you go to cut that down, people will tell you have to evaluate each scene, and you have to be able to easily justify why is this scene in the book and how does it further the plot. It's either got to further the plot or it has to be integral to character development. There's probably some other reasons that you could justify, but those are the two that I used when I went and did massive editing. So I didn't get that, and it is hard because we're seeing the middle of the book, but it was difficult. I didn't really get, as you were saying, I didn't really get what was the thing that was accomplished in this scene. So, and the other overall comment that I had is that since you're this is in first person, so you can only reveal what that person would be privy to. And there's a couple instances in here where you sort of go a little off the beam, where I think, so this guy's coming to this book club and he doesn't know anybody, but how suddenly he knows Ulf's name. Right, so how does he know that he wasn't introduced? So that, maybe you could easily take care of that if you wanted to explain that, but it was not explained. And there's a couple other little instances of you revealing something that the narrator wouldn't necessarily know.
That's an easy fix.
Yeah, very easy.
But that's good to point that out. I was wondering too, that he had just settled down. He's in a group of people he doesn't know, and they had just started, and then he left the room to go get a drink. I was surprised at that. Maybe some people could do that, but it was surprising he would. And then the conversation
He never actually comes back.
He never comes back.
But he is sort of back.
He's
but
he's
just
walks
into the kitchen. Yeah, no, well, he's in the kitchen, and then you're being objective, Anne was saying now. I'm like, well, is he hearing from the kitchen?
Yes,
Did he
I
come
thought
back
that
in? So there's a
too.
little sort of, I don't know if it's a continuity break, there's a little problem there that could be easily rectified.
Can I
go
say
ahead.
something? Okay.
No.
Defend yourself.
No, I'm not trying to defend myself, but
No,
but the style of the whole story actually is, and maybe it's a problem, but the style of the whole thing is, there's many times I don't explain what's going on.
Oh.
And it's to create an atmosphere of a little bit of mystery, and it's like him leaving the room, like I don't want it to be realist. I don't want him to say like, oh, your name is Ulf, and I want all of those things to be stripped out. And him leaving the room and him coming back, I don't want to talk about him coming back in. I just want it to just be there.
Why? Why is it you want to do it like that?
I think that's just stylistically how I've been writing this, and
that's all right.
Do you think there's like people should just make assumptions and there's no need to take up paper for it?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sort of like if you're watching a film, you don't, sometimes you don't know what's happening. You just kind of go with it, and a lot of the style that I'm trying to create is this go with it feeling where the reader is constantly unsure where he is or what's happening, and not to an extreme degree.
Yeah, you gotta be careful because you
Oh,
don't
no,
want to
no,
frustrate the reader. And
Not
they'll just
to an
flip it.
extreme
Right.
degree, but enough to create a sense of I want to figure out what's happening.
Intrigue.
Right. Well, if you're going to do that, I would say make sure you do. The only time I noticed that was in one place, and if you do it once, it seems like a mistake.
Sure.
If you do it several
Yeah.
times, then
Yeah.
it seems intentional. And it could be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. You were saying.
Go. No, you go.
I like the first sentence in that we're presented with a person who's grudgingly going to a book club. Then you go ahead and prove to all of us, the reader included, why he doesn't go to the book club. These people are pretentious, posturing snobs discussing vast literary philosophies.
They never discussed the book.
The book is, but they're just so pleased with themselves being able to expound on their literary character. I understand why he doesn't go to book clubs right
So,
now.
can I just ask, was that intentional? Did you want to make these
Of
people?
course, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to be
That's
totally clear,
good.
because I totally agree with you, and I just want to make sure
Yeah.
you want us to feel like, I can't wait to get out of this.
I was telling him when he left, I said, "Don't stop at the kitchen.
Right.
Just keep going."
That's actually really good. Sorry, I have to break in. That's a good point, because somebody said, it was sort of weird when he left. The Shiraz had gone to my head, and I wandered into the kitchen. That was my favorite part, because of what
going.
you said. I was just like, oh, that's what I do. I'd be like,
Get
oh,
me
gotta
outta
get a little
here.
more wine. Gotta get out of here. You know?
I have to go, we're out of wine. I have to go to the Packy again. Something like that.
In New
but it's also,
Hampshire.
but it's also in Cambridge near Harvard.
Right.
How snooty can you get? I mean, you start off snooty and then get more snooty. It's unbelievable. You did a great job. The only problem I had was the sentence length drove me crazy.
Yes. Yeah.
I had agent after agent tell me, keep it simple.
Yep.
Reduce, and I've highlighted. I mean, I've got in black, I bolded the length of the sentence. It takes off a quarter of the page.
Yeah.
Break it up. Just, if you can't think the sentence without taking a breath, think of me trying to read it. You know what I mean? It just narrow the scope or break it up or something. But I got a kick. I took it for what it was. It's like a one-act play,
Yeah.
and that's all it is. And what I took away from it was these people are insufferable. And the guy,
He's not named.
no name,
Right.
Yeah.
The
said,
doctor.
he's a
Dr.
doctor, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't have to put up with this crap. I'm out of here. He doesn't say that because he's a doctor. He says, I think I'll leave. Get me away from these people. They make me puke. And you've done a great job identifying this type of character. People so self-possessed and pleased with it. They sit around patting each other on the back. It makes me sick.
It's really,
And
really
the little-
behind
no,
the scenes.
you're like a duet of little old ladies watching.
They were wonderful. Yes, I was one of the old ladies. I pointed that out. I said, good point.
No, I do want to say that there are 3 members of a book club here who will go nameless, but we enjoy Shiraz and we like
Yeah, but we don't
Brie
talk
and our
like
company.
that.
No, we do not. We
No,
don't
we do
talk
not.
like that. We're not pretentious.
No,
but
we
we
do.
know some people who are.
Shoot,
But
I'm
I just wanted
They're
to
not
connect to something you were saying, and that is that what I'm trying to do in this whole thing is have these scenes that are like plays. You said
Yes.
plays because none of the scenes have too much going on. There's
But the reader comes away with
Yeah,
something.
that's
There's a
what-
message
right,
implied.
that's right.
And that's good writing.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to do. Like,
Yeah.
you know how Seinfeld is able to communicate a lot through not much.
a show about nothing.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
And
Yes.
actually, this is sort of a commentary on the book itself that I'm trying to write, in that they're talking about how, or one of the people is talking about how, for her, the most important thing is the mood that you come away with, or the feeling you leave with, rather than what happened. And
Well-
I, at this point, when people are reading this, I would hope that part of the tension in this is actually they're thinking about, oh, how does this relate to what I'm reading?
Well, how does it relate to how you feel about books?
Yeah.
I personally think that an ending is absolutely necessary. Read The Lady of the Tiger,
Yes.
and you end up
Oh, God, yes.
frustrated
Yes.
at the end. Give me it's like a coach that doesn't use a whistle because the coach doesn't know the sport enough to say, okay, stop, let's do this again. If you can't write an ending, write about a proposal in Algonquin. I mean, it was just as vague as that. So, go ahead.
I want to ask you about book club, why Mar dragged the protagonist
Yes.
here, if they hang out a lot, the two of them. And if you could compare this interaction, have the protagonist compare this interaction with people to other interactions. Maybe have him think or have him speak tomorrow on the way home about some other observation he made or some other experience he had. Because you may do that elsewhere, we just need that as readers.
So overall, I'm a little concerned about when I read the summary here, where it says that the larger novel is about a doctor who spends his nights on call in the hospital and his days wandering the city trying to understand people. And then reading this scene, which communicates a lot and definitely gives you a lot of feeling about the characters. But I'm sort of putting those two things together. I'm a little concerned about the structure of the overall book. Is there, I mean, your summary really doesn't convey what's going to happen to this doctor and how he's going to change in some way during the story. So I'm sort of hoping that you do have a structure where he sort of starts out this kind of guy, and through his experiences he changes and he learns something, or he develops a relationship or something, as opposed to just having sort of scene and scene and scene, and then how do you connect it together?
I can talk a little bit about it, but I think you're right. I think that's something that I'm struggling with. So the way I've written it so far, the first half is called Day, because he's actually working during the day, and he has a normal. And the second half is called Night, and that's when he's working at night and awake during the day. So it's got this two-part structure. The first part takes place in the spring and the summer, and the second part during the dark winter of Boston, basically. And the book actually opens with the marathon bombing, because this doctor was at the finish line. And that's sort of what starts it and kind of makes this doctor lose faith in people, kind of. And he's lost his girlfriend, and as he goes through the story, he's trying to restore that connection and that faith he initially had.
I can't imagine that happens to him in the scene, the poor guy.
So this is
gonna meet all kinds,
this was not really restoring the faith in humankind.
Yeah.
This was a sort of, it didn't really happen.
But he's going to meet
But the bombing was violent, and what he finds is the small pleasures are what kind of help him, and that's kind of the structure,
Right.
and
That
it's
sounds
obviously
great.
not apparent here, but this is a scene during the day scenes.
Plus, we won't see that because we didn't start from the beginning. That's
Right.
why it can be
Yeah.
tough.
Right.
That's
No,
great.
I think
That
that's
sounds
really
really good.
interesting. I actually wish that I had known that about the about the
Yes.
summary. No, but it's a really interesting progression. It makes me really want to read it, and I probably would hang in there more with scene and scene and scene, because I would know, he's trying to work through this sort of loss of confidence in humanity, and and then I can be thinking, how do each one of these scenes, like, is that in the plus column or the minus column? So very
Everything's
interesting.
kind of propelled forward by that.
Right.
Yeah,
So that's something to
experience.
keep in mind the next time you have to write a summary, that you'd want to include that,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
It does.
It's okay.
I hear
The
aliens.
endless phone ringing. We forgot that part. Well, has anyone not? Do you have any questions for us?
No, this is great.
It's good. Are you just writing on the side? Do you go to a school?
Well, I'm a physician, so
I was going to ask that question.
Speak, write what you know. Yeah.
yeah.
That's great. So thanks for coming in.
Okay, thank you so
That was
much.
really nice.
Thanks, that was great.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Connie, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us for this episode of Writers Infusion. We will see you next time. Keep writing.